Someone says something small, a tone of voice, a door closed too hard, a message left on read, someone being slightly late, and something in you. Disproportionate, immediate, out of nowhere, fires. Not mild irritation, something bigger, something that feels like it has weight behind it that the situation itself doesn't justify. And later, maybe minutes later, maybe hours, you feel confused by your own reaction. It was such a small thing. Why did it hit so hard? Here's what almost everyone gets wrong about this. They call it an overreaction. The word implies the reaction was too big for the situation, but that framing misses the entire point. The reaction wasn't too big for the situation. It was exactly the right size. For a different situation, one that no longer exists, one that happened a long time ago. What looks like an overreaction to the present moment is almost always a perfectly calibrated response to something from the past. The trigger is small, the reaction is large, and the gap between them is where the history lives. Here's the foundation. Psychiatrist Bessel von der Kolk, whose work on trauma has become foundational in modern psychology, identified something he called somatic memory, the way the body stores experiences that the conscious mind has moved on from. The mind forgets, or processes, or decides it's over. The body doesn't. The body stores emotional experiences, particularly threatening or overwhelming ones, as physical sensation patterns, as tension in specific places, as a particular quality of alertness, as a readiness to respond that sits just beneath the surface. And when something in the present moment, a tone of voice, a specific look, a pattern of behavior, matches the stored pattern closely enough, the body responds, not to what's happening now, to what happened then. This is why the trigger can feel completely disproportionate. It isn't responding to the message left on read. It is responding to every time a message was left on read and it meant something serious, to every time silence meant withdrawal, to every time the small thing was the beginning of something much larger. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between then and now. It just responds. Here's the mechanism that makes it so specific. Not everything triggers you. Specific things do. Specific tones, specific behaviors, specific combinations of circumstance, and that specificity is not random. Psychologists studying emotional triggers find that the things that trigger the strongest reactions are almost always things that match, in some structural way, a pattern from early experience, not a copy, not an exact replica, a match in emotional logic. The partner who goes quiet when upset, and the parent who withdrew his punishment, the colleague who corrects you in front of others, and the teacher who humiliated you in class, the friend who cancels last minute, and the person who was supposed to be there and wasn't. The present person isn't doing the past thing, but the emotional logic is identical, and the nervous system, which stores patterns, not events, responds to the logic, not the person. Psychologist Dan Siegel calls this neural resonance, when present experience activates neural pathways built during earlier, more formative experiences. You're not overreacting to them. You're reacting through them to someone else, something else, another time entirely. Here's the concept that explains everything about intensity. Psychologist Daniel Siegel developed the concept of the window of tolerance, the zone within which a person can experience stress, discomfort, or emotional activation without losing the ability to function and respond thoughtfully. Inside the window, you can feel things without being overwhelmed by them. Outside the window, the nervous system goes into either hyperarousal, too much, panic, rage, flooding, or hypoarousal, too little, shutdown, numbness, disconnection. Here's the crucial part. People who experienced consistent stress, unpredictability, or emotional overwhelm in childhood, or at any significant period, often have a significantly narrower window of tolerance than people who didn't. Not because they are weaker, because their nervous system was shaped in an environment where the range of safe experience was narrower. So when a small thing happens, a tone of voice, a canceled plan, it doesn't land inside a spacious window where it can be processed thoughtfully. It lands near the edge of a much smaller window and tips them out. What looks like an overreaction from the outside is someone operating with a smaller internal space than most people realize. Here's the layer that makes it most personal. When you get triggered by something small, the feeling that arrives is rarely a new feeling. It is almost always a very old feeling. Wearing the clothes of the present situation, the feeling of being dismissed, of being unimportant, of being left, of being misunderstood, of being too much, of being not enough. These feelings have history. They were first felt in contexts that were far more serious than the present one. And when the present situation echoes that history, even faintly, even structurally, the old feeling arrives, full-sized, original intensity, unchanged by time. Psychologists call this an emotional flashback, different from the classic visual flashback, but equally real. A sudden immersion in the emotional state of an earlier experience, triggered by something in the present. The door closed too hard is not the door. It is every time a door was closed like that and something bad followed, and the feeling that arrives knows all of it, even if your conscious mind has forgotten most of it. So here's what's actually happening when small things trigger you. Your nervous system is storing and pattern matching experiences in ways your conscious mind isn't fully aware of. You have a window of tolerance shaped by your history, and small things can tip you past its edge. The specific triggers aren't random. They match the emotional logic of earlier, more formative experiences. And the feeling that arrives is almost always older than the situation that brought it. None of this is weakness. None of this is being too sensitive or too emotional or too much. It is your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, protect you from patterns that were once genuinely threatening. The problem isn't the system. The problem is that the system cannot always tell the difference between then and now. And the path forward, which is real and which takes time, is not learning to suppress the reaction. It is helping the nervous system learn, slowly, to distinguish between the past that shaped it and the present it's actually in. The next time something small triggers you, and you feel the familiar confusion of a reaction that seems too large for the moment, try asking a different question. Not, why am I overreacting? But, what does this remind me of? Because the reaction is information. It is your nervous system pointing, imprecisely, loudly, urgently, at something that still matters, something that hasn't fully been processed, something that is waiting still to be understood. The trigger is small. The history behind it is not. And the reaction, however uncomfortable, however confusing, is not a flaw. It is a signal. If this video describes something you experience regularly, share it with someone who needs to understand why. And subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the behaviors, the patterns, the things about being human that nobody explains.